Hi, and welcome to section 2.4 for Econ 2 on the AQA exam board. Today we'll be looking at aggregate demand and each of the components of aggregate demand in more detail. We will also be looking at the accelerator effect. But first, what is aggregate demand? Aggregate demand is the total demand for final goods and services in an economy at a given period of time. It has the formula of aggregate demand equals C plus I plus G plus X minus M, where C is consumption, I is investment, G is government expenditure, X is exports, and M is imports. You can view the last two terms, which is X minus M, as net exports. We can see where the components of aggregate demand come from when we have the circular flow of income with a government, a bank, and the economy is an open economy whereby there is trade. We can see that consumption comes from households purchasing goods and services from firms, investment comes from banks lending monies to firms to invest in new products, new machinery, research and development, or firms undertaking their own sort of investment. G is government expenditure, and the government raises money for its expenditure through taxation. This taxation can be on households or firms. X and M are the final two terms. X is exports, which are domestic goods that are sold abroad, and these have a positive effect on aggregate demand. M is imports, which are foreign goods that are purchased by domestic consumers, and this has a negative effect on aggregate demand. So let's have a look at each of these components in more detail, starting with consumption. Consumption is the level of consumer expenditure on all domestic goods and services. The level of consumption tends to be fairly stable over the business cycle. It is around 60% of GDP, and consumption is the largest component of GDP. The business cycle is explored in more detail in section 3.2. So during a boom, consumption will be about 60% of GDP, and during a bust, consumption will still be at around 60% of GDP. The next component of aggregate demand that we will look at is investment. Investment is split up into two types of investment. The first is spending on capital goods. New machines and factories are examples of capital goods. One could view spending on capital goods as firms investing in the future of the business. They're investing in new plants and new machines which will allow the firm to be more profitable in the future. The second type of investment is spending on working capital. These are goods that are stock for the firm or are semi-finished. So these are goods that are ready for sale or require a little bit more work and then will be able to be sold by the business. The easiest way to view working capital is to view it as the stock that the business has. The firm has had to invest in producing these goods, they've had to pay the factors of production to produce these goods, but they are yet to actually sell these goods to a consumer or another firm. And this is why spending on working capital counts as investment. In the UK, investment counts for about 15% of GDP. Investment levels are extremely volatile over the business cycle, and they tend to follow economic growth. This is known as the accelerator effect. Whilst there is economic growth, investment is high because firms are confident about the future and are willing to invest. However, in a downturn, firms are concerned about the future and are more focused on surviving rather than growing the business. This means that they cut investment. In addition, in a downturn, a firm is likely to experience lower sales, which leads to an increase in their inventory. Firms counteract this by decreasing their production level, which is a decrease in investment. This is a decrease in the second type of investment, which is spending on working capital. Investment is also a lagging indicator of the business cycle. By being a lagging indicator, it means that the business cycle changes and then the investment level changes. But is it the business cycle which moves first and then investment levels move later? This is because it takes a while for firms to adjust their activities. During a downturn, firms will keep their production levels constant, but they will see their sales fall. This leads to a build-up in stocks and inventories. After a while of inventories building up, firms will decrease their production, and this is a decrease in their investment levels. During an upturn, firms will see their sales increase. They will accommodate these additional sales by running down their existing stocks. However, it will take a while for the firm to change their production levels. One reason could be because the firm is unsure whether this increase in sales is likely to last. Also, it takes a while for firms to employ more workers or ask existing workers to work longer hours. And this is why investment is a lagged indicator. Investment is also a key component of aggregate supply. A high level of investment by both firms and the government can increase the productive potential of an economy and allow and facilitate economic growth. This is especially the case for the first type of investment, which was spending on capital goods. If the firm invests in new machinery or invests in training their workforce, this will allow their workforce to become more efficient, and this allows the whole economy to produce more. Aggregate supply and the effects that investment has on aggregate supply is explored in more detail later on in the course. The next component of aggregate demand is government expenditure. Government expenditure accounts for around a fifth of GDP and is spending on state-owned goods and services such as healthcare and school. Governments also spend money on transfer payments, which are payments to individuals who do not provide a good or service in return for the transfer. Transfer payments are not included in government spending, as they are just a transfer from one group to another. The final two components of aggregate demand are exports and imports. We group these two together and call them net exports. Net exports measures the value of exports minus the value of imports. Exports are goods and services that are sold overseas and are an injection into the circular flow of income, hence why exports has a positive value. Imports are goods and services which are brought from abroad, and these are a leakage to the circular flow of income, as money is moving from the domestic economy to a foreign economy. This is why imports have a negative value. A positive value for net exports means that an economy is exporting more than they are importing. A negative value is the opposite, whereby an economy is importing more than they are exporting. This is the case for the UK economy. Currently, we are importing a considerable amount more than we are exporting. So now let's look at what aggregate demand looks like on a graph. Aggregate demand plots the price level against real output. When plotting aggregate demand, it is important to label your axis correctly. On a supply and demand diagram, we were plotting the price against the quantity. On an aggregate demand diagram, we are plotting the price level against real output. But why does aggregate demand look like this? There are two reasons for this. The first reason is falling real incomes. As prices rise in an economy, it means that the real income of consumers fall. This is because the same amount of income at a higher price level can purchase fewer goods than if the price level in the economy was lower. This is why aggregate demand is downward sloping. When the price level is high, fewer goods can be purchased than if the price level was lower. The second reason for this is the balance of trade. If the price level within a country continued to rise, foreign goods and services would appear cheaper in comparison to ours. This would cause domestic consumers to switch from consuming domestic goods to consuming foreign goods, i.e., imports in the economy would increase. Also, as the relative price of our goods and services has increased, it would mean that we are less competitive globally, resulting in other countries choosing to make their goods domestically or buy from another foreign country rather than consuming our goods. And this decreases the level of exports in our economy, and hence why a higher price is associated with a lower amount of real output. A change in any of the components of aggregate demand, whether this be C, I, G, X, or M, will result in a shift of aggregate demand. We will discuss shifts in aggregate demand later on in this course.